The night I played my father's old Rialto tapes, I heard my own voice whispering back to me on a recording made decades before I was born. He served under Admiral Byrd in Antarctica 1947. The official story says they were mapping ice. His letter said otherwise. He described a wall of light and something watching from behind it. I waited to stop digging, but it's already too late. What you're about to hear was never meant to surface. I always knew. There were parts of my father's life he never talked about. Certain stories he locked away so tight even the way he changed the subject felt rehearsed. Growing up, I chalked it up to the war. He served in the Navy during World War II, and everyone said that kind of silence was common. But after I went through the battered foot locker at the back of his closet, I realized his silence wasn't about war at all. I found the letter hidden in a false bottom drawer beneath his medals. The envelope was brittle with age, sealed with wax, and stamped with something I'd never seen before. A symbol that looked like a compass rose wrapped in thorns. No name on the front, just a date. March 4th, 1947. That was months after Operation High Jump had supposedly ended. My father never said a word about that mission, not once. It started as a joint military scientific expedition led by Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd, publicly at least. They took 13 ships, over 4,000 men, and more aircraft than you'd think could land on ice. Official records claim it was a success. They studied weather geology, trained in cold weather combat. Then they abruptly pulled out and came home early. That's what the public knows. But the letter, my father's letter, tells a different story. At first, I thought it was a diary entry. It began with what sounded like routine deployment logs, coordinates, weather readings, equipment conditions. But by the third paragraph, the tone shifted. He described something they encountered out past the standard map lines. Beyond Queen Maud Land, he wrote, where the ice becomes unnaturally still and even the wind forgets to move. That line chilled me. It didn't sound like a sailor's account. It sounded like a confession. He described what he called a wall of light, a shimmering barrier on the horizon that bent the sky and shimmered like a curtain made of heat. Planes Cento scouted vanished off radar within minutes. He claimed the ice beneath their feet began humming on certain days, low and constant, like the engine of a ship that was still too far off to sea. He ended the letter with one sentence that has been living in my chest ever since I read it. If this letter finds you, tell no one what I've seen. Of course, that was impossible. Now, I didn't just read it. I scanned every word into my head, burned the shapes of those letters behind my eyes. And once you see something like that, you can't just fold it up and forget it. I started digging obsessively. The public debriefings from Operation High Jump are available, but they're sanitized, clean and clinical, like they were written in a boardroom. He found a declassified memo dated weeks after Byrd returned that mentioned unexpected magnetic anomalies and mission compromise due to loss of air recon assets losses. The official statement never said a word about that. Then there were the news clippings. One in particular stood out. A Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, ran a headline in early 1947 quoting Admiral Byrd warning of enemy aircraft capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. He never repeated that quote again, and when he returned, he retired quietly. No interviews, no memoirs. He began to think I was going mad, connecting dots that weren't meant to be connected, until I found the second envelope. It was hidden in a hollowed-out copy of Moby Dick in my father's office. The handwriting was his, but shakier. The ink bled in places like the page had been clenched in a trembling hand. Inside was a rough sketch, pencil on yellowing graph paper of a landmass unlike anything on modern Antarctic maps. Jagged cliffs, a deep central chasm labeled Event Zone, and in the margin, a single word written in block letters, prohibited. I stared at it for hours. Something about it made my pulse rise, like looking at a crime scene you've never seen before, but still recognize. There was more, a list of names, some crossed out. One matched a man I remembered vaguely from my childhood. A tall, quiet man who used to visit once a year, always at night and never stayed long. I found his obituary from 1978, cause of death, exposure. But it happened in Arizona. In the middle of summer, I called every surviving member of my father's old crew I could track down. Most were gone. A few hung up the moment I said my father's name, but one agreed to meet. We sat across from each other in a diner off the interstate somewhere in Utah. His eyes were glassy, faded by time. But when I showed him the map, something sparked. Not recognition, fear. I was there, he said almost inaudibly. But not where the map said we were. We went further, too far. He wouldn't elaborate. Just that they were told never to speak of it, not even to each other. That when the expedition ended, they signed documents under threat of court-martial and something worse, something not legal. They said it wasn't our job to understand what we saw, only to forget it. I asked him what they saw. He looked at the window like he expected something to be there. His hand trembled as he reached for his coffee. You ever look at the stars down there? He said they're different. Not fewer, not more. Just wrong, I asked again. He only whispered one word before standing up and leaving me alone with the bill. Alive. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with the sketch folded in my hand, replaying every word of my father's letter. The wall of light, the magnetic distortion, the humming ice. It wasn't just scenery. It was a warning, maybe a boundary, maybe a door. I kept telling myself this could still be the imagination of old men haunted by war. But something nared at the edge of that comfort, something about the consistency. They all said the same thing without saying anything directly. It was as if they knew someone might still be listening. Then yesterday I received a package. No turn address, no postage, just placed on my porch while I was at work. Inside, a reel-to-reel tape recorder, 2 unlabeled reels, and a note in handwriting that didn't match my father's, but used the exact same phrasing from his letter. Tell no one what you hear. I haven't played them yet, but I will soon, because whatever my father saw in 1947, whatever Bird brought back or tried to keep out, it didn't end there. And now it's found its way to me. The first reel started with silence. Static at first, faint and pulsing, like distant wind slipping between 2 cracked windows. Then a voice, garbled, male, too distorted to recognize, but not my father's. There were other sounds, mechanical whining followed by a sudden drop, like the pressure in the room itself changed. I felt my ears pop, even though I knew that made no sense. At the 7-minute mark, the tape screeched, and then underneath it something whispered my name. I yanked the plug from the wall, heart hammering in my chest. The tape recorder kept spinning for a full 5 seconds after the power cut, clicking as it ran out. I didn't sleep that night. Every shadow in my apartment felt just a little too sharp, like I was being watched from inside the walls. By morning, I told myself it was stress, my mind playing tricks on me. But I didn't throw the reels away. I labeled them Sample A and Sample B and tucked them into a locked box. A week later, I reached out to an old colleague, Marcus, an audio engineer who used to do contract work for a defense contractor. He owed me a favor. When I handed him the tapes, he raised an eyebrow. Where the hell did you get real stock this old? I shrugged. Estate stuff. Can you clean it up? Pull anything useful? He agreed, but the next day he called me at 2 a.m., voice shaking. I ran it through the isolation deck. There's a harmonic layer under the primary signal, something embedded below the audible range. You need to hear this. I met him that morning. He looked worse than I'd ever seen, unshaven, eyes red, hands trembling. He loaded the digitized file and scrubbed to a section at 1423. Through filtered frequencies, the voice was clearer now. We crossed coordinates breached. Magnetic vector inversion. He saw us then, nothing but static again. Marcus paused the track. I ran a spectrogram. Look at this. He pointed to the screen. The audio pattern formed a shape, not random noise. A repeating lattice, almost symmetrical, like circuitry or glyphs. What is that? He shook his head. Not language, not anything natural either. The waveform, it loops, but not in time. Like it's trying to fold something. That's when the lights in his workshop flickered, and his backup drive surged and fried. Sparks shot from the wall outlet, and the screen blinked out. He cursed and unplugged everything. This isn't just a weird signal, he muttered. This thing reacts. I offered to take the tapes back. He refused. said he didn't want them in his house. That night, I received an anonymous email. No sender, no subject, just a series of coordinates. Latitude 70.215 degree dot, longitude 150 degree, 50 degree W. It placed the location within Marie Birdland, one of the most inaccessible regions on the continent and officially unclaimed territory. I cross-checked it with the sketch from my father's second letter, the event zone, lined up almost perfectly. I booked a one-way ticket to Santiago, Chile. From there, a series of increasingly remote flights eventually got me to a Russian research outpost within helicopter range of the site. I was writing a book on Cold War exploration. The team stationed there didn't care. As long as I paid the chopper pilot, they were happy to let me freeze. We flew out early morning. Clouds clung to the ice like shrouds. The farther we went, the less the compass seemed to matter. Instruments twitched. The GPS screen flickered and died. "Interference," the pilot said, tapping the side of the panel. "You said this was just an old camp." I didn't answer. We landed near a ridge surrounded by flat, unnatural ice. It wasn't just the color, though it had a bluish sheen like quartz. It was the silence. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. 100 yards in, I found the first anomaly. A rusted metal stake driven deep into the ice. Wrapped around it was a length of frayed cable long since snapped. It led to what looked like a weather balloon gondola half submerged, its payload broken open. Inside a scorched instrument panel, the label had faded, but 3 letters remained etched in metal: USN. I marked the coordinates on my sat map and pressed forward another 100 yards. The ground changed so subtly I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't tripped. The texture under my boots wasn't snow. It was smooth sculpted. Brushing the ice away, he uncovered what looked like an engraved panel. Steel fused into the glacier. It cleared more. Symbols, not letters, not runes. Something between the two. They're repeated in circular patterns, always spiraling inward. As I stared, my vision blurred. The air thickened. I swear the cold began to hum. I turned back toward the chopper, except the chopper wasn't there. I spun in place, nothing, just white silence. I wasn't panicked yet, not exactly. I'd marked the LZ on my beacon. I retraced my steps, or tried to. The prints were gone. My sat-map blank screen. I turned the device off and on, still nothing. Then I heard it faint at first, like a low whistle under the ice, a resonance. I dropped to one knee, placed my hand against the ground. It pulsed, not seismic, rhythmic, a pattern. I backed away, breath quickening. My radio crackled, dead for an hour, now sputtering to life. A voice came through my voice. "You need to hear this." It repeated, looping. My words from the recording back at Marcus's studio, played back through a channel that wasn't connected to anything. Then another voice joined in. Not mine. Lower, wet, like it was speaking through water. "Return." I dropped the radio, ran. I don't remember how I found the chopper. One moment I was sprinting across a flat stretch of nothing. The next I crashed into the skids. The pilot was already powering up, eyes wide. "You said 1 hour." "That was 4. He didn't wait for a reply. We lifted off so fast the snow barely had time to settle. I watched the ridge vanish beneath the clouds, and for a split second I thought I saw something just beneath the surface. A shape moving slowly, deliberately, like it was watching me leave. Back at the outpost, my boots still wet, I opened my gear to find the second tape had warped, melted. The metal casing fused like it had been microwaved. That same night, Marcus sent me a final email. Subject, "They heard it too." Bonnie, I tried to run another analysis. Power in the whole building cut out. We lost 3 servers. But there's the thing. The distortion you heard, it's not just layered noise. It's a triangulation signal like sonar. It was never meant for us. It was meant for something else, something listening. It tried to call him. No answer. The next morning, his studio had been cleared out. Not vandalized, emptied. No trace of equipment, no signs of forced entry. The landlord claimed the lease had ended. When I showed him Marcus's name, he frowned. That space that's been vacant since 2019. I checked the calendar. The last 2 weeks was still there, marked with my meetings, their seats, the tapes. The physical evidence was still in my hands. But Marcus was gone, And the next day, someone left a business card on my windshield. No name, just a set of coordinates, the same ones as before. Only now they'd been updated by 3 decimal places, shifted just slightly as if something had moved or was waiting. I drove home with the card in my pocket, my hands locked on the wheel like I was afraid it would vanish if he let go. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't call anyone. I just got back to my apartment, locked the door and started pulling every blackout curtain I owned across the windows. Something had changed. It wasn't just about my father anymore. It wasn't just a mystery. Whatever I disturbed was moving, adjusting. I pulled out the envelope again. The coordinates were printed, laser precise, down to the 1,000th decimal. When I cross-referenced the change, it wasn't random. The new location had shifted 23 MSE southeast of the previous mark. A place called Mount Sidley, one of the largest volcanic calderas on the continent, supposedly inactive, untouched for decades. But that wasn't the part that chilled me. The timestamp embedded in the coordinates metadata matched the exact moment I heard my own voice over the broken radio signal. That wasn't coincidence. Someone waste-tracking response time. The next day, my mail was scrubbed, all of it. My contacts, my archives, the backup drives connected to my cloud gone. When I checked the recycle bin, every folder was replaced with a single text file. It said, "Stop." Then I noticed the router light was still blinking even after I unplugged the modem. Paranoia doesn't creep in. Gradually it smashes through like a siren in the middle of a funeral. I didn't trust the power. I didn't trust the airwaves. So I went off-grid, got motel burner phones, all cash. I left everything behind. Just took the tapes, the coordinates, and a print out of my father's letter. I didn't even tell Marcus I was going back. But before I could make it far, I was intercepted. 2 men in plain clothes pulled me from my motel room in the middle of the night. They didn't flash badges. They didn't have to. One had a small scar beneath his left ear, like something had been implanted and removed. The other just stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. "We need you to stop looking," the first one said. His voice was level, not aggressive, just flat. I asked who they worked for. He didn't blink. "That's not your concern." He placed a photo on the table. It was grainy, infrared, time-stamped 3 days prior. It showed me standing in front of the ridge where the engraved steel had been. But in the corner of the frame, something else, a shape, tall and narrow, barely visible, like heat haze carved into a humanoid silhouette. "We've been trying to keep this contained since 1947, he said. "You're about to undo 70 years of silence." I stared at the photo. "Is that what killed them?" He didn't answer. "They didn't detain me. They didn't arrest me. They just left the photo and a warning. You won't be told again." When I turned back toward the window, my rental car was already gone. I hitchhiked to the airport, changed flights 3 times, used fake credentials. I wasn't going to stop. Not after what I'd seen, not after what my father risked to leave behind. It took weeks, but I eventually found someone, an independent researcher out of Norway, who'd been monitoring polarionospheric disturbances. He had no ties to government work, just a fascination with fringe anomalies. He showed me their readings. "The spike started in late February," he explained, "centered on your coordinates. No natural cause. But there's the kicker. Every few days the spike resets like it's pulsing." The waveform looked familiar. I pulled out the image from Marcus' spectrogram, the lattice pattern. It was identical. "This isn't weather," he said. "It's a transmission." That night his lab was broken into, equipment smashed, files taken. I found him outside, sitting on the curb, bleeding from his temple. "They don't care if you're harmless," he whispered. "They care if you notice." He got him to a hospital under a fake name, then disappeared again. Back in my motel, I played the surviving portion of the second reel. Just static now, but layered beneath. If I turned the volume just right, I could hear it. Not speech, not a signal, a rhythm, pulsing, calling. I knew where I had to go. They made arrangements to join a private expedition, one of the newer tourist-adjacent outfits. People with more money than sense, seeking the last edges of the earth. I paid double for a seat, tripled to be dropped near the volcanic rim alone. The pilot didn't ask questions. The caldera was enormous, an open mouth in the middle of endless white. Wind whipped through it like breath from something sleeping. I climbed down the western edge. Beneath the ice, I found scorched rock, black and glassy. And then I saw the scar, a perfect circle etched into the rock face, 50 ft across, with grooves spiraling inward. At the center, a hollow indentation, a socket empty. I dropped to my knees. My father's letter flashed in my mind. The term he used, interface point. I hadn't understood it. Now I did. Whatever had been here, whatever they removed or tried to contain, was meant to connect to something like a key or a receiver. Suddenly my satellite phone vibrated. I hadn't turned it on. The screen glowed with a single word, return. No signal bar, no prompt, just that. Then it went dead. So did my watch. I looked back at the indentation. From somewhere beneath the ice, I heard a vibration. A low moan, not mechanical, not human. I echoed up from the depths of the volcano, like a breath being drawn. The wind stopped and something behind me whispered my name. I turned around, expecting to see someone standing there. Nothing, just the ice, the silence, my name still hanging in the air like a breath I hadn't taken. I backed away from the indentation slowly, watching the ridgeline for movement, for anything that could explain what I'd heard. But it didn't come again. There was no second whisper, just the slow return of wind, curling over the caldera, brushing against the back of my neck like fingers that hadn't finished what they started. I climbed out, limbs shaking, the sky dimming into that cold Antarctic twilight that always looks wrong, like the sun isn't setting, just reconsidering whether it ever wants Taurus again. I didn't wait for extraction. I hiked 5 mi back to a secondary waypoint and triggered the emergency beacon. I didn't care who came. I just wanted out. When the helicopter arrived, the pilot looked at me like he knew. Not what I'd seen, just that I was carrying something I couldn't put down. I didn't speak. Neither did he. We flew in silence. I made it back to Punta Arenas, booked the next flight out, and by the time I landed in Miami, I had 3 new voicemails from numbers I didn't recognize. The first was just breathing. The second was static. The third played a slowed-down version of the phrase I'd heard in the caldera, return. I didn't go home. I rented a car, drove halfway across the state, and checked into a roadside motel with flickering neon and a lobby that smelled like cigarette ash and forgotten coffee. There, I finally opened the backup drive Marcus had secretly duplicated for me, a folder I hadn't noticed before. It was labeled Threshold. Inside were 5 video files. I clicked the first grainy footage. A man in navy dress blue standing in front of a steel vault door. His name tag was scratched out, but behind him was a wall chart marked with longitudes I now recognized. Operation High Jump. He looked into the camera and said, "This is Recorder 8, final log, February 28, 1947. The structure is not responding to electrical signals. We've tried acoustic pulses, magnetometers, thermite charges, nothing. The commander believes we're standing on a mechanism, not a structure. Something buried." He paused, his eyes shifted. He leaned closer like he wanted to say something off the record. "If they open it," he whispered, "it won't be the beginning of discovery. It'll be the end of denial." The file ended. I played the others. Footage of electromagnetic readings spiking violently, compasses spinning in place, personnel staring at fixed points off camera, mouths moving but no sound. One file showed a man sitting perfectly still, while others moved around him in fast motion. Except when I paused the video, his eyes would shift slightly between frames. By the 5th file, I was shaking. I knew what they were trying to do. They weren't documenting the anomaly. They were trying to communicate with it. That's when the lights in my motel room went out. No flicker, just darkness. The air changed, thick and mineral, like deep cave air or the inside of a shut tomb. My ears rang. I reached for my phone, dead. I moved toward the window, heart pounding, when a low vibration rolled through the floor. I dropped to one knee, the same frequency from the reels, from the caldera. The walls groaned. Then the television turned on by itself. Black screen, then a burst of white, then my father's face. Not a photo, not a video I'd seen before. It was him, older than I remembered, older than he ever got, Toby. He was standing in the snow holding something wrapped in canvas. His lips were moving. No sound, but I could read it. You were never supposed to find it. Then the screen went black. When the power returned, the backup drive was gone. So was my wallet. But the tapes, those were still there, untouched. I checked out within 10 minutes. The next days were a blur of movement. Hotels, gas stations, safe houses. Every time it treated to sleep, I heard the whisper. Motorways in words. Sometimes just pressure. Subtle changes in gravity. The way objects shifted in the corner of my eye. I stopped questioning it. I knew it was leading somewhere. The final push came from a sealed envelope tucked inside one of my father's old field notebooks. I'd missed it before, thinking it was glued shut from water damage. Inside a single page, a hand-drawn schematic, the machine the same dimensions I'd seen engraved into the ice, but this one showed the core intact. At the center was a perfect sphere, surrounded by concentric rings. Below it, a note, "Do not energize until reverse field collapses contained." The handwriting wasn't his. I had no idea what a reverse field collapse was, but I knew someone had finished building this thing or was trying to. And if it had once been buried beneath Antarctica, someone had also taken it out. The next day, I booked a private meeting with an old contact in Langley. Not official backdoor. He owed me a favor from years ago. When I showed him the sketch, he didn't ask where I got it. He just stared at it for a long time before saying, "Where did you hear about Node Zero?" I told him I hadn't. He looked at me like that was worse. "Then someone's feeding you," he said, "and you need to stop chewing." I asked what Node Zero was. He didn't answer, just handed me a file folder and said, "This is what I can give you before they know you came to me." Inside were redacted reports about an object recovered from beneath the ice in 1947, terms like temporal displacement field and biometric. Synchronization anomalies. It didn't read like fiction. It read like panic. The last page was a photograph, black and white, of what looked like a human figure standing beside a large metallic structure. But the proportions were wrong, the limbs too long, the head slightly concave, like someone had pressed a thumb into asphere. The figure was holding something, a sphere. I asked where the object was now. He just said, "Not here, not anymore." I left with the folder. I didn't look back. That night, the whisper came again. Only this time it wasn't a word. It was a memory of the dream I'd had in childhood over and over. A white field, a humming sound. My father standing far ahead, just out of reach, pointing toward the sky. Except in the dream, the sky wasn't sky. It was the surface of something enormous, smooth and rippling, like the eye of something waiting to open. I stopped sleeping. Even when I tried, my dreams no longer felt like mine. I'd wake up sweating, heart racing, convinced I'd been somewhere else, someplace deep, silent and cold. The dream always ended the same way, with the sound of my father's voice barely audible, whispering the same two words. Don't remember, but I did. Every moment, every sound, every impossible shape etched in us in stone. I remembered what I'd seen in the motel room, the footage of the machine, the sketch, the whisper that wasn't human. And I remembered the look on my father's face in that final frame, more haunted than I'd ever seen him in life. Like he knew what he'd left behind would be found. I thought I'd reached the edge of it all, that I'd dug up every secret and dragged it into the light. But the truth I found wasn't buried in the snow or sealed in a vault. It was inside me, a single awful realization that settled like dust and refused to be brushed off. He brought something back. Not an object, not a virus or a being, something else, a code, a pattern, a signal he couldn't stop carrying. Maybe it changed him, maybe it just waited. And when he died, it passed to me. That whisper I kept hearing, it didn't start in Antarctica. It started the night he passed. The day after I got back, I had my blood tested twice. Once through a private lab, once under a fake name at a hospital in another state. The results were identical. Anomalous magnetic isotope concentrations, neurological resonance above baseline, non-random alpha waveform duplication during REM. The doctor called it noise, suggested I see a neurologist. I didn't go. I started seeing patterns everywhere. In the grain of wood, in puddles. The frost on glass, always spirals, always converging on a central absence. I opened every notebook, every file, looking for something I missed, and I found it tucked in the back of my father's weather log from the expedition. A note scribbled upside down on the inside of the back cover. It said, "If you've come this far, it's already too late, but you might still close the door." I didn't understand what he meant until I read the final entry in the Langley folder. A memo from a 1949 operation in the South Pacific. It wasn't signed. No names, just a single line. The door was not closed. It was distracted. That's what the transmissions were for. The interference, the harmonic layers hidden in the reels. Not warnings, not surveillance. They were bait. We weren't trying to study it. We were trying to keep it occupied. But something failed, and now it was listening again. The next few days blurred. I started to hear the voice more clearly. Not out loud, not exactly. More like pressure in my skull, shaping thoughts before I could stop them. Images would flash behind my eyes, places I'd never been, geometries that couldn't exist. I started writing symbols in my sleep. I woke one morning to find a full page on my nightstand, covered in unfamiliar glyphs drawn in my handwriting. I burned it. I started planning what I thought would be my last move, a full disclosure. Publish everything, upload every file, every log, every image to every open-source archive I could find. Let the world see, let someone else carry it. But then it stopped, because if I could hear it, maybe others could too. Maybe that was the point. To multiply, to echo. And maybe that's what happened in 47. Maybe they didn't just find something. Maybe they brought it back because it wanted to be brought. And if that's true, spreading this would only make it stronger. So I made a different choice. I gathered everything. The letters, their rules, the sketches, even the notebook pages with the symbols I swore I didn't write. I drove 400 miles to an old storage site on federal land, where abandoned mine shafts still snake beneath the surface. I sealed the container inside a lead-lined trunk, wrapped it in foil, and lowered it into the deepest vertical shaft I could find. I poured kerosene on the rope and dropped a flare. The fire went down so far I couldn't see it hit bottom. It stayed there until the smoke stopped rising. When I returned, the whispers were quieter, not gone, just distant like a radio signal falling below range. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I still feel it circling back, like it's waiting for a better time, a clearer frequency. My father didn't defeat it, he didn't outrun it. He just bought us time. Maybe I've done the same. Or maybe I've only delayed something inevitable. I don't know if what he found was ancient, extraterrestrial, interdimensional, or something else entirely. I don't know if it's a mind, a force, or just the echo of a dead god drifting through time. But I know it's real. I know it's listening. And I know it never left. I've gone back to my regular life, or the closest version I can manage. I changed my name, moved twice, disconnected from everyone I used to know. But the silence isn't really silence anymore. It's waiting. And if this letter finds you, if somehow these words reach your hands, don't chase it, don't dig. It wants that. Just remember, the light isn't there to show you the way. It's there to keep you from seeing what's behind it. Hello, agents. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to like and subscribe. And there's another one waiting for you right here.